Good morning. Buenos días. Today we have the panel of closing achievement gap. We have different panelists. We have school board member Karen Perez. We have Representative Rene Placencia, and also Andrew Sparr, the president of the FTA. As Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. As community leaders, we have experienced firsthand the need for an equitable and the transformative power of education. And today, I'm honored to be the part of the panel on closing the achievement gap as a moderator. As the Puerto Rican and Latino community continue to grow in Florida, our students' educational needs grow as well. Language is one important aspect when we talk about education, and the current crisis has added additional challenges to the educational system. The following questions are for everyone, starting with Representative Placencia, then School Board Member Karen Perez, and then Andrew Sparr. How do you think the pandemic has impacted our Latino students across the state of Florida? And do you think the achievement gap has increased as a result of the crisis, and why?
So, first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm excited to be here with my fellow panelists and be able to discuss education in our state as it impacts our Hispanic community and Puerto Ricans across the state of Florida, especially in Central Florida, where we have the largest density of Puerto Ricans in the entire state, really in the entire country. As far as the question about the achievement gap, we still don't have data on it. I do believe that we will see a drop off in student learning because of the pandemic. There was a lot of disruption in education. There was a lot of fear, especially throughout the first half of the pandemic, and just with schools closing early. Even though we went to a hybrid or a virtual, it was still tough on kids not being able to see their friends, not and having the insecurity of the potential health concerns for themselves, for their parents, for their grandparents. So I think it was probably a very difficult year for all students across the state of Florida, and our Hispanic students are no different.
Thank you, Representative Placencia. School Board Member Karen.
Well, the lack of computers, the disparity between the haves and have-not, the pandemic truly brought to light. The lack of computers, access to the internet. Our Latino students were already, some of them were already disengaged with our but when this pandemic hit, that gap was really, really apparent. And those students also who had difficulties in learning because they didn't have the materials, also it really hit them hard. And also not just in our cities, but in our rural areas where the high number of students that are dealing with poverty are living. And also the inability of our parents, the Latino parents, to help our students when it came to the electronics, because a lot of our Latino parents don't have access to computers, so it's very difficult for them to assist their students in the learning process. So we saw that really hit our families hard, during this pandemic, and when it came to the achievement gap, it totally affected our students. When it came to math and reading, the students already were on average 1 percentage behind. And when these numbers come back to us, we're going to see believe it or not, that our students are going to be behind at least 5 to 9 months from their white colleagues, and it's going to be a major effect on them. And when we have to get them caught up, we have teachers right now that are in a burnout effect, and so having to get them caught up with teachers already in a burnout effect is going to be in a very difficult place that we're going to find ourselves. And then the economy is going to have to see and deal with how this effect on our Latino community is going to find itself later on, and how what's happening with our Latino students is going to have an effect on their economy later on.
Thank you, School Board Member Karen Perez. Now we're going to hear from the president of the FEA, Andrew Sparr.
Thank you, Johanna, and thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here. My name is Andrew Sparr. I'm president of the Florida Education Association, and this is a very interesting question. Just recently, I was on a call with some folks with the Hispanic Federation talking about our public schools and with some parents. And what a lot of parents talked about is how hard it is often to navigate our school system, to know where to go and get the support. In a pandemic, it's made it that much harder. And so I believe our public schools are by far the best place for any child to learn. Our public schools are where we come together as families. Our public schools are essential to our own economic well-being. I'm a parent. I have 2 daughters in our public schools. We all want the same things. We want our kids to be happy. We want our kids to be excited about learning. We want them to be engaged in the learning process. And I think we all recognize this was not a normal year. So yes, what this pandemic actually exposed was the fact that there are still so many inequities in our public school systems and in all education, right? These inequities have been brought on by the fact of not getting the investment we need in our public schools, making sure we don't, or not making sure we have the equality, the equity we need within our schools, and making sure that every child, regardless of race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of zip code, is getting the education they deserve. People use the word a lot, access to education. No, this is not about access. This is about getting the education that our children deserve. And this is a great opportunity to talk about it. We all need to come together and support our public schools, support the people who work there, and make sure that our children are getting what they deserve.
Thank you, Andrew. I would like to welcome Renata Tareo, and I will repeat the questions so she can answer for us. The questions are, how do you think the pandemic has impacted our Latino students across the state of Florida? And do you think the achievement gap has increased as a result of the crisis, and why?
Actually, thank you so much, and I'm sorry that I had some technical difficulties, but definitely the achievement gap has been noticeable in the sense that, a lot of kids don't have access necessarily to a computer. They don't have the internet access for those that were or are still at home. So it's really that automatically created an achievement gap and a problem for those that didn't have the resources and a computer ready or even internet access, something as simple as that. But also, but we've also seen another side, which is really interesting. Because Representative Placencia and I have a bill, that really deals with the testing of kids who speak English as a second language and the achievement gap that creates and the problems that creates. But what we saw last year is the graduation rates. Now we have data to show that the graduation rates of these kids who all of a sudden last year didn't have to take the test, the graduation gap went away. So it proves Representative Placencia and I's point with our bill that when you are testing these kids in a foreign language, it doesn't mean they don't deserve to graduate. It shows they actually do deserve to graduate. And we, as taxpayers, are investing all this money in these kids. They're turning around and not being able to graduate because they don't get a specific test score. So I think, we have the achievement gap that everybody talks about, but let's talk about the graduation rate and the difference it made when all of a sudden we weren't just basing it on tests and test scores. We need to talk about that because now we have data to prove that these kids who are tested in English and are either held back or they get a certificate that is pointless, I might add, because you can't even get into the Army with this certificate. So it really goes to show how we're limiting these kids' future by putting them and giving them a literal dictionary. Here, take the test. Here's a dictionary. Figure it out. I was one of those kids. So I can tell you it's absolutely amazing to me how the pandemic has proven our point and the need to test kids in their native language, especially when it comes to math and science.
Thank you, Senator Tadeo. Now we're going to go to round 2. This round will include individual questions for each panelist. The first person will be School Board Member Karen. Karen, your first question is, how can the legislature support the work being done by the school boards at the county level?
I had to unmute myself. Yeah, that's what Wish just talked about. I am so excited for the legislation regarding the testing of our ELL students, having that test in their native language, but also, passing legislation for increased funding for the dual language programs. Because right now, I'm in Hillsborough County, and we have 250,000 students, and we only have 5 dual language classes. And it's all in elementary schools. We have students that come in at different levels of schooling, high school, middle school. And so for them to be able to have the opportunity to get into a dual language program and to be able to have the opportunity to learn at those levels would be incredible. To get that funding to be able to assist them and, just to get an overhaul of the FTE at this time to assist in the education of our students who have fallen behind during this pandemic. At least for a short period of time so that we could catch our students back up. That would be incredible right now and much needed.
Thank you, Karen. I have another question for you. What are the challenges as a Puerto Rican and Latina you faced as a school board member?
Well, the community, the Hispanic community does not come and present itself to our board meetings. It's very rare that I get a Hispanic parent or even student at our board meetings. And, so when I share the concerns of the Hispanic community, it's not taken serious, and given, when the community presents itself, the rest of the board, we have 7 board members. I'm one of 7. And so when I'm talking about the issues of the Hispanic community, I'm kind of brushed off. And, so I need for the community to show up. The concerns in their voice, we have a tremendous Latino community here in Hillsborough County and throughout the state of Florida. Showing up, letting people hear your voice, letting people see your concern and hear your concern It's tremendous. There's power in our voice. And also, letting that concern be shown also through emails. Sending emails in your native tongue to the superintendent, so he can see that representation in your native language is also needed. That's really, really important. So, showing up, letting your voice be heard is crucial in the education of our children.
Thank you, School Board Member Karen. Now the following questions are for Representative Placencia. The first one is, some of the legislation related to the native assessment, HB 711 and SB 724, are coming back this year to Tallahassee. What does the native assessment testing entail?
Sure. So as Senator Tadeo had mentioned earlier, we have filed that bill. I filed it in the House, and Senator Tadeo filed it in the Senate. And I also want to mention that Representative Toledo, Jackie Toledo out of the Tampa area, is the prime sponsor on that as well. So she's working hand in hand with me on that bill. And also Representative and Chairman Vanzalupis, who chairs the first stop of that committee, is a big advocate for that bill. He and I spoke about it over the summer, not knowing what committees we'd be chairing, but obviously knowing that one of us may be chairing the first committee stop. And we have a rule here in the House that you can't file a bill that goes through your committee first. So we were working hand in hand to make sure that if one of us was not able to file the bill, that the other one would. And we've been working on that bill. We're hoping to get a hearing for that bill soon. We're very optimistic. We've had meetings with staff. We've had meetings with advocates across the state. To answer your question about what's in that bill, it's a very big bill that does deal with dual language learners in addition to native language assessment. And so it starts in the beginning with pre-K examinations to assess where a child is at. That's a big priority for Chair Lupis, who works in his private life in the pre-K and VPK space in early learning. And we want to make sure that our students who English is not their first language are not being penalized or held back in any way because of the lack of time that they've spent in this country. We know we have some brilliant students. School board member Joanna Lopez had one of them from our school in Colonial, Samuel Vilches, who's a great story, came here from Venezuela and quickly grasped the English language out of the help from teachers and his own drive, and was able to get a scholarship to an Ivy League school in a very short period of time. We have lots of students like that all across our state who, for no fault of their own, are being held back academically and in their development as people long term because of some of the points that were said here earlier, especially by School Board Perez. And so the bill addresses that at the early stages. It allows through parents' discretion of being able to receive or have the test administered in the native language or in English. But in the early grades, that's directly up to the parents if they opt to have their child test in their native language. And for our bill, in order to meet some of the financial requirements of the bill, we've limited it only to Spanish and Haitian Creole at the moment, with the direction that over time we would start adding more languages to it, so that, if we have Vietnamese students, or if we have students who speak Arabic, which we have a lot of students coming in from the Middle East and into our state as well, that they're also given the ability and the access to instruction and to testing in their native language. The last thing I want to add about this is that we do have some precedents to this. There is a law that exists now in our state that holds a child harmless for the third grade FSA, that they cannot be held back if they've only been in this country for less than 2 years. So we do have precedents of allowing for some exceptions to be made for students who are coming from other countries. I think the data shows that this this type of program, and if the bill passes, these programs would be highly beneficial to these students, to their learning gains, and to their ability to gain an income throughout the course of their lives.
Thank you, Representative Placencia. The next question is, what does the proposed legislation seek out to do? What is their status, and what is your opinion about them?
So I think I mentioned much, if not all, of the proposed legislation in my last question, in my last answer to the last question. And if there's anything you want to chime in on, Senator Tadeo, I'm more than happy to hear from you as well. But my hope is that we can get, at the very least, some of the components into a bill that either the Senate sends to us or we send to the Senate, and we can send on to the governor's office. We put together a bill that has our wish list of changes that we would like to see done. If we can just get some of those, it would be a win for the entire movement for native language assessment. Oftentimes, what we aspire to do is get our foot in the door through small increments of language that get put into law, so we have that conversation started, so we have something to work with, and then in subsequent years we can begin to add more of those provisions in new bills, in new sessions. And so that's our goal. There's always a game plan. There's a strategy. Having a sponsor like Senator Tadeo in the Senate is a huge advantage for us, with her reputation there and with her experiences as a native language or an ELL student here in the state of Florida. But Senator Tadeo, do you want to add anything to that?
She will be answering the same question on her turn. Thank you. I have the last question for you. Thank you for the answer, Representative Placencia. And now we're changing a little bit the subject, but we're still on testing. The last question for you during this round is, what is your opinion about waiving all standardized testing for all students this year due to the pandemic?
Sure. I think we need to continue with standardized testing. I do think that we need to hold schools harmless, students harmless, and districts harmless. But we do need the data to see if there is an achievement gap. I mean, the first question we asked is whether there's a gap in achievement for our Hispanic students across the state of Florida. And we don't have an answer to that until we see the data. And so it's important for us to have some data to see where our kids are. Have they regressed? How far have they regressed? It gives our teachers and our schools a starting point, potentially not just next school year, but potentially in the summer. Are there some students that we need to bring back and we need to remediate earlier than other students? Did our distance learning work? I mean, that's a great opportunity for us to measure the efficacy of distance learning and which ones work better, because some school districts rolled it out different than others. So is there a school district that got it right and had a higher performance than other school districts? And we can learn from that data on how to continue to deliver education, not just during a crisis like a pandemic, but during normal times as our world changes to a more virtual and artificial intelligence world.
Thank you, Representative Placencia. Now we have Andrew. Andrew, what is your opinion? It's the same question. What is your opinion about waiving all standardized testing for all students and the native assessment bill? Or is it a combination?
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to echo some of what Representative Placencia and Senator Tadeo said earlier, which is that that testing, first of all, was invented by teachers. I think we should know that. Teachers do regular testing in the schools to figure out where students are and how they're doing. We don't need a standardized test, a high-stakes standardized test every year, especially when we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? I mean, we all know that in normal circumstances, schools rearrange their schedules. Parents get notifications. Make sure your child gets a good night's sleep. Make sure they get a breakfast. Schools provide breakfast. So much is done. Kids literally get physically sick from testing. And here we are in a very stressful time for all of us, including our kids. And we're saying, let's drive forward with that high stakes testing. It makes no sense. There needs to be a pause. We know where kids are. You heard the school board member, Karen, talk about it as well, that we know kids are having some learning gaps because we've had quarantining and other disruptions in our school caused by COVID. Why would we grade kids this year in that sense? Why would we penalize them when this has just not been normal? By the way, it hasn't been normal anywhere in the world, right? Like, this is not just unique to Florida or the United States. This is a worldwide pandemic and challenge. So I absolutely think it makes a lot of sense to pause the high stakes testing. And then we absolutely need to support testing in native language. It just makes sense. We're about educating. We're about making sure whether or not kids know something. A language barrier, like for me, speaking a second language, it is a barrier. And it's not right to say that barrier measures your intelligence, because it has nothing to do with your intelligence. So let's focus on what kids are learning. Let's make sure they have access to bilingual education. Let's make sure they have access to the supports they need to be successful in our communities and in our society. That's what every parent wants. We want our kids to be more successful than we are.
Thank you, Andrew. I have another question for you. We've seen an increase in the numbers of the Puerto Rican and Latino teachers. What are the initiatives and or programs does the Florida Education Association have to recruit, organize, and support the Puerto Rican and Latino teachers?
So this is a great question, and it's a great challenge our public schools face. You know, it is so important when kids come into school that they see people that they can relate to, that understand the culture. And so we have to be very deliberate in our work in recruiting teachers of Puerto Rican descent. We have to be very deliberate. And not only that, we have to support those teachers, right? You know, when you are in our schools, we very often, teachers talk about this all the time. We feel like the keys are thrown at us, go at it, have fun. That's not supporting people. That's not making sure everyone is set up for success. We want our teachers to be successful so our students can be successful. We have a massive teacher shortage in the state of Florida, massive, not just of Puerto Rican teachers, but of all teachers. And we have to make sure that we are respecting all our people, all teachers who come in our profession, all people who work in our schools, and supporting them, including our Puerto Rican teachers. Because if you get people to come into the profession and they don't feel valued, they don't feel like they have a voice, they don't feel like they can help kids the way they want to help kids, guess what? They don't stay. They leave the profession. And that's not good for our kids. We need stability in our schools. And I got to tell you, I appreciate Representative Placencia because he's sponsoring the bill to address some of the issues that we've had in teacher retention and recruitment. And that has to do with salaries and how we treat people when they come into our schools. So we have to reach out to all of the groups. This is a community effort. So the Hispanic Federation, as I talked about earlier, we've been working with them. We've been working with Johanna and our school boards. We've been working with a lot of other groups because we have to be in this together. It takes everyone recognizing that this work is deliberate. We have to make sure that we are talking to high school students who are of Puerto Rican descent about going on to college and onto the university level and becoming teachers and coming back to the schools and teaching in the public schools. Because again, I'm going to end with this. Our public schools are truly the best place for kids to learn.
Thank you, Andrew. Senator Tadeo, why do you think it has taken this long for the Florida Legislature to recognize the importance of native language assessment?
I mean, frankly, it's just a lack of understanding from the point of view of our experiences. So having voices of our own, such as myself and Representative Placencia, and even some Representative Placencia brought up, all the others who are supporting, including Representative or Chairman Alupis, who actually is in my Senate district. So and he's my representative, I'm his senator, but it's having people that are actually representing areas that understand this issue and or have lived it. And so I think, being able to go, the chairman of education in the Senate is Senator Gruters. And although he's most known for being the chairman of the Republican Party, he's actually somebody that might surprise people that is willing to listen to our experiences. And I did sit down with him and talk to him about this bill specifically and got to tell him my story and why I feel from an investment perspective in the future of those who will be job creators, as I am, in the sense that I have a small business. I've been meeting a payroll for over 22 years. So, the testing for me actually said I wasn't good enough to go to college. I wasn't smart enough to go to college, which I really wanted to do. And I'm not saying every kid has to go to college, but definitely at least have a diploma from high school so that you can, if you want to go into the Army, go into the Army. If you want, whatever it is that you want to do, you should be able to do that. And that language handicap at the moment, I might add, because clearly you can tell by my English that it turned out okay. But my testing was terrible. I actually have a copy that I have saved of my ACT that I took where I got an 8. And I'm not embarrassed to tell people this. I'm actually framing it in my office here in Tallahassee so I can show it to people and show how that score did not in any way have anything to do with my ability or my intelligence or my understanding of the subjects. It was just the language barrier that was there at that point in time, clearly, by my English now. It was that was handicapping me from being able to move forward. And this proves our point. The other point that is sometimes brought up is, it will cost so much money. Well, the federal government has programs to help pay for this. So this is not a good enough excuse to give us. Other states that are much more conservatives than us are doing it, such as Texas. How can we be behind Texas? So I say it's time for us to get with the program, really understand that we're leaving a lot of kids behind and a lot of opportunities for them to have gainful employment and a successful career. And, other names have been brought up as perfect examples. I want to bring up Santiago Potes. Santiago Potes, it was a DACA recipient, and he, from Miami, was awarded the Rhodes Scholarship. Think about this. This is a kid whose parents came from Colombia, and it was a teacher. He likes to tell the story about his teacher who saw his potential. And this teacher, his parents had no idea how to guide him through the process so he could be the success that he is today. But it was that teacher who did that for him. And it was a Cuban-American teacher in Miami. So again, our teachers really deserve a lot of support regarding the other bills, but I really believe that we're having those conversations and we need to have them. Is it going to be a 1, 2, 3, we're going to pass this bill? No, it is hard to have these conversations. It is hard to get these bills heard. But you know what? It does take years to make the sausage up here in Tallahassee. But I believe that we will get there. But in the meantime, again, now we have data to show why when we do this and hold kids back or not give them a diploma because of a test score, really we are in essence hurting our own investment, our own resources that we've put into these kids' futures.
Perfect. Thank you, Senator Tareo. I have another question for you in order to be objective in the same topic and have different perspectives. And is the question that I already saved to Placencia and Andrew, to Representative Placencia and Andrew Sparr, is what is your opinion about waiving of standardized testing for all students this year due to the pandemic?
My opinion is we should absolutely waive it. Look, I have a 14-year-old daughter in school, and literally I have